Goldylocks Productions broadcasts universal cosmic frequencies that unlock, awaken, and expand the consciousness of our worldwide viewers and listeners.
Goldylocks Productions presents the Inspiration from Spirit show with your host, Reverend Lea Chapin. The focus and goal for this show is to assist humanity in the awakening of a new level of consciousness that will bring peace to planet Earth.
Welcome, I'm Lea Chapin. Well, I'm back again. You know, I come 1 week and then the next week I'm not here, so I'm back again. Anyhow, I'm really delighted to have my special guest today, Karen Kaplan. She was with me several weeks ago talking about her book, Descendants of Rygod. We're going to talk about that book again briefly, but we're going to talk about the exciting news of her being selected for the LA Film Festival for that script that is being made or going to be made in a movie, and her new book, the sequel to Descendants of Rygod. So Karen, for those of you who've joined me before, know Karen from my previous show, Inspiration from Spirit, and this show. You are in for a big delight today. So we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about her book, we're talking about the script, we're going to talk about that sequel, we're going to talk about entity attachment, so stay tuned. So Karen was born and raised in West Rogers Park, a Jewish neighborhood in the north side of Chicago. She received her BA from the University of Illinois in Chicago Nutrition and Medical Dietetics. She also trained at the Clariot Center of Hyde Park, Illinois as a spiritual director. She maintained a private practice and lectured for many years throughout the Chicago metropolitan area on general health, weight loss, and spirituality. After her father died, Karen began to write a memoir about her father's life. And Karen tells the story of her father, Eric Kaplan, who, after surviving the Holocaust in the forest of Eastern Europe, limped through the rest of his life by lying, cheating, abusing his family, and never letting go of his rage. Many years later, her father, who was on his deathbed, Karen was extremely unhappy as a single mother, realized that she was consumed with a similar feeling of rage. She began keeping a journal, and in the course of writing about her father, starts to understand that she has inherited her survivor mentality. And at risk of losing sight of ever being content, in sharing her story, Karen struggles to do the most challenging thing she's ever done, forgive her father, and let go of the legacy of bitterness and fear that has hovered over the Jewish community following centuries of anti-Semitism. And this is the story of Descendants of Rygod, which is now a script that is being made into a movie that again won the LA Film Festival here in November, just a couple weeks ago, right, Karen? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here today.
So this is exciting. Tell us all about what happened with the book going into the script, and then how you got to be selected and awarded with the LA Film Festival for your script.
Thank you. So I've written the book. You gave a very nice summary of what my memoir is about. And then I decided this was a story that many people can identify with. Many of us have grown up in households where there's abuse, or you feel there's some kind of neglect, or even in the workplace there's harassment and all sorts of abuse, and from family, friends, strangers. And so this is a story, it's not just a story of a Holocaust survivor coming to America and inflicting pain on his family, but it's a story that everyone can identify with, because everyone's been hurt in their lifetime, and it's how to get past that hurt and how to learn to heal. So I share my story and I share what has worked for me. And I thought during the past several years, I've been speaking throughout Chicagoland, in synagogues and churches and book clubs and so many places. I spoke in New York and also in Germany and Poland. But I thought another way to get this message out would be to have a script written, which would be based on my memoir. So I had hired two guys from LA to write a script, and it's more of a dramedy. We added a lot of humor to the story to make it so it's not as emotional and brings some empathy. And so since the script had been completed, I've been sending it out to the different festivals to see if to see if I may be able to a different festival. So the LA Live Film Festival selected my script, and then I became a finalist, and then they actually chose my script as the winner of the Hemingway Award. And so the virtual film fest was this week. Unfortunately, during COVID, there was I would have been in LA this week.
Oh my gosh.
It had been COVID. I was also selected, my script was selected for the Eastern European Film Festival, which takes place in Warsaw, because the book and the movie my father was born in Rygród, Poland. And so a lot of the story takes place in Poland. We learn more about his years early on as growing up in the small village, and how he survived for 3.5 years in the forest. So that's another festival that I was selected, and one other small festival in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's what I've been doing. And
I'm so happy for you.
Yeah.
We've been following this journey for a while now here. I don't know how many years it's been since you wrote your book.
So I'm praying that one day, sooner than later, that someone will come along and say, I love this script. I want to be the executive producer. I want to help raise money. I want to give you money, and we'll make a movie. So that's what my ultimate dream is for this script.
And so the key is to help people understand about not only trauma and how it affects us, but be able to learn to forgive and to move forward, so that we're not continuing to carry that hatred within our hearts and that bitterness. Because, as we see now in our current climate, with a lot of what is happening in the world, where a lot of people's anger is being brought forth, that really affects us. It affects us not only emotionally, but affects us physically, and affects our families. And so, your story is really about trying to change that climate of helping people to shift from fear and separation and anger and hatred into love and forgiveness. I know you've had a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but you had some backlash with that, haven't you, in your community?
Some in my community, so when I talk about forgiveness, the book is basically, and the movie it's about a story of me, a daughter, learning to forgive her father. But I took that message of forgiveness and I applied it also as a Jew toward the Germans who had created havoc and destruction in Europe, and so. Before I left for Poland, I asked some friends if they could ever forgive the Germans or the Nazis for what they have done to your family. I have many friends who are children of survivors, mm-hmm. and it's very difficult. And I understand why they feel that way, and they absolutely said no and never. I had one guy friend who said he hasn't even forgiven the Babylonians for what they've done.
Yeah,
2,000 years ago. So and when I asked another friend, she had said that I need to be very careful what I write in my memoir, because this message of forgiveness sounds very Christian, mm-hmm. and which is also kind of amusing. But I was raised in an Orthodox environment, and I learned about forgiveness from my rabbis and my teachers. And when I learned about forgiveness from you, and we had long, lengthy conversations, it was another way. It was a different thought process of forgiveness. And for me, it's about, I've been given this experience in life. What am I going to do with it? Am I going to hold on to it? Am I going to let it suck me in? It happened. I had a difficult childhood. Am I going to hang on to it and hang on to all those negative emotions, or can I learn to let it go, forgive my father, and move on? And mm-hmm. so the message, the movie will have this message. This is why I'd like it to be made into a movie. It's a message that many can,
can relate to. Hopefully relate to,
or learn from. Yeah, my experience. But but there's no profit. I'm not prophetizing. This is just what has worked for me. It may not work with others, and others may disagree, and I'm fine. Everyone has their own process and way of healing. This was my way that worked for me.
And so let's fast forward a little bit and move into how you came to write your second book, how you moved into now working on. I think you said the working title was Conjoined. Is that correct?
The working title now is called Conjoined. And while I was speaking, I remember there's this one gentleman who stood up, and when I speak and share the story of this book, of my memoir, I always talk about my father's ancestry, our family lineage. My father was born as Avram Yankel Steinsapier of Rygrud, Poland. But he changed his name from Avram Steinsapier to Ari Kaplan. And I'm Karen Kaplan, so I've kept my maiden name. And I didn't find out about why he used this alias until I was a teenager. And I asked my dad, why did you change your name? And he said, he held up his hand and pointed his index finger, and he spoke sternly to me with his Polish accent. He said, I changed my name, saved me. I used this identity and saved me during the war, but don't ever talk about this again. So I never thought much about this name change. I always wondered why I'm not a Karen Steinsapier, but I let it go. And then while I was speaking one day, one gentleman stood up and said, well, you've just shared with the lineage of the Steinsapiers way back to the Spanish Inquisition, where our family was expelled from Spain in the late 1400s and then traveled all throughout Europe and made their way into Poland and settled in Rygrud. But who is this man, Ari Kaplan? And it was the strangest thing, because during that week, I thought about that. And I said, who is this man whose name I carry? I wanted to know about him. Was he a stranger to my father? Why did my father want to tell me about this? What, were they friends? Did he know him from Rygrud? Did he meet him during the war? Why did my father change his name? Why did he use this ID? I had all these questions circulating in my mind, and I thought, I want to learn more about this man named Ari Kaplan. The name Kaplan will continue on through our family. So I went ahead and started researching the name Ari Kaplan. Well, Kaplan is a Jewish name. It's an Eastern European. Many Germans, Poles, and Hungarian Jews are named Kaplan. So I knew this man was Jewish. So I went to the United States Holocaust Museum. They have an archive division, and looked up the name and had some people help me. And there was a few Kaplans, a few Aris, but no one in the same age range as my father. I also went on these Jewish genealogical websites, couldn't find anything. I went to, looked up at the Statue of Liberty. They have a huge website for all the refugees that came in. And I found a man named Ari Kaplan that came February 2nd, 1950 into Ellis Island. But that was my father, because it already is. So, I even went and met here. They have a church that's affiliated with the Mormon Church in Utah. And the Mormons had collected all this data in Europe. And I worked with some people there for a week to help me find who is this man, Ari Kaplan? And I was in the dead end. And every place that I thought I could find some information, nothing.
Get in.
So I called you up one day, said, Lea, I'm so frustrated. I want to know about this man whose name I carry. Can you help me out? And is there any other institution you think I might call? Maybe. And I also worked with my Polish tour director in Poland, and I went through every possible way. And you said to me, well, Karen, why don't we just conjure up the spirit? And I was silent. I said, okay. So I know that at times when
all that work for nothing. You have to do all that.
I know. I spent 6 months. Okay. So I said to you, well, okay, during sessions with you, I've talked to my mother in spirit and my brother in spirit, but I know them. How crazy that I could speak to someone that I don't even know if he's dead and that he would come through. I thought that was the strangest thing. And you said, well, let's just give it a shot. Mm-hmm. So we set up a meeting, and during our first session, I was nervous and I couldn't sleep the night before. I was wondering, could this be possible? Could I actually meet this man named Lea Kaplan? And I thought, well, maybe he met my father during the war. Maybe they were in the forest together. Maybe they helped rescue saved Jews. Or maybe he actually knew him in Rygrid. Maybe they were friends, schoolmates. All these different ideas kept going on. So we set up our meeting, and you do your channeling, you do your prayers, and then all of a sudden you're in your trance-like state, and then you start thinking, I am here, the spirit of Lea Kaplan. And I was getting really excited. And Lea Kaplan said through you that he was a soldier in the war. He was very timid and shy as he came through, as you mentioned. And he said he was from the town of Rygrid. And I said, then he's got to know my father. And I asked, well, tell me about yourself and tell me about your family. I want to know. He said his father was Joseph. His mother was Henrietta Kaplan. He had 2 older sisters. They lived in Rygrid. His parents have done fairly well. They owned a store, and they were able to help serve the community. And because of the war, they were able to feed the soldiers, and they were therefore remained alive during the war because they kept the store open to provide for food and supplies. And I was all excited. I said, well, where was your store? And he said, well, in the north end of the village. I said, oh, right by the church. And he said, there's no church in Rygrid. I said, then I started arguing with him, I've been to Rygrid twice. There is this huge Gothic red brick church, Catholic church in Rygrid. You can't miss it. You can see it from one end to the other end. Then he continued on and said, well, across the street from my parents' door is a train station. And every afternoon I would wait there under the lamppost for this young woman that I liked. But because of the war, I could never meet her, marry her. He also mentioned that he had a limp. He was born with a limp. It was similar to polio, but he had a club foot. And him and his family, he would go to school. He would then work at his parents' store. His parents would work every day at night. They would often go picnicking by the lake, which there is a lake in Rygrid, and he'd go sled riding down the hills in Rygrid, which there is a nice hill in Rygrid, right near the lake, overlooking the lake. So there was a few common elements that seemed right. But when he said train station, I said, whoa, Lee, what are you visualizing? And you said, Karen, I'm seeing a train. I'm seeing tracks. And on this old building, I see the name Rygrid. And I said, I don't know who you're talking to, but I knew you were talking to someone who died, but I didn't know who. And I said, you know what, Lee, let's end the session now because it's not making sense. And you were totally fine with it. And we ended the session and you said, you know what, Karen, you'll figure this out.
You always do.
So I was so upset because I had my hopes my expectation of hopes were so high. And I
got the wrong channel or something, right?
Yeah, you're talking to some other guy. I don't know who you were talking to. And so I started to spend 3 weeks on the internet, day in and day out. I went ahead and looked up the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church was built in 1908. It was erected in 1908. And he said that his father moved from this other town to Rygrid in 1914 and had the store. So the church was already built before the store got there. So that didn't make sense. And then he said, the train station. So what did I do? I started looking up how the trains went from the capital Warsaw to Białystok, the largest city in the northeastern area of Poland, where my father's Rygrid is, and how the trains connected, and from Białystok, how the train tracks connected up north toward Rygrid. They never connected up north. They connected south or west of the city, but never into Rygrid. I thought, well, maybe the tracks were bombed during the war. But this wasn't making sense. I got so frustrated. And finally, on the last day, like after 3 weeks, I finally typed in the word Rygrid train station. I Googled the word, and all of a sudden, you know what happened? There's a picture of a train station with an old train station named Rygrid on, and there's 4 passenger car station. There's this lamppost. I said,
I'm good.
It doesn't make sense. And I screamed and I jumped out of my chair and I called my husband, Bobby. I said, Bobby, come look. And he doesn't believe in any of this. And he looked at this. He was wide-eyed and his mouth was dropped. And he's like, I don't believe this. I go, so I had to look on satellite maps and I tried to find this town of Rygrid. You know where it is? There's another town called Rygrid in Poland, but it's not on the northeast part where my father's from. It's more central northwest. There's 2 towns called Rygrid. And I looked at this town. It's the small little farm village. There's no municipal buildings. There's not a church in sight, but they do have a train station. So I couldn't wait to call you to say, Lee, we're talking to a man named Lea Kaplan, who, how crazy is that? He lives in the city of Rygrid, and there are only 2 Rygrids in Poland. And I thought, I have to learn more from this man. I wanted to know how he knew. How did he meet my father? So we had another session. And in this session, we talked about how he was a soldier in the war. Mm-hmm. And at first, when he said he was a soldier, had he been living in my father's town of Rygrid near the Russian border, he would have been a Jew fighting with the Jewish partisans in the forests, with the Soviet Red Army, or he could have been conscripted into the Russian army, fought on the Russian front, which meant death, against the Nazis. But he lived more on the western part of Poland, which is borders with Germany. So he lived in that part of Poland. So I thought he obviously was in the Polish army, the Polish underground, and that's where he was a soldier during the war. So our next session with you, he tells me, and you said he's coming in a little bit more timid and a little more anxious. And he said, well, I asked him, tell me about your service. And he said, a Polish sergeant came to their house in Rygrid. He knew his father. His father was mayor from another town and moved to Rygrid in 1914. And he told his parents that Ari has to go into the war and you will keep your store open and he will be my personal assistant in the war. Don't worry about him. He's slow. He has the club foot. He will just cook for me, clean my clothes, carry things that I need. And Ari said my mother was very nervous because her 2 daughters were sent up north. Their husbands were fighting in the war, and now her youngest son was now going into the war as a soldier. And his father said he must go into the war to serve his country. And so he went into the war, and during the session, he was kind of feeling a little, he's uncomfortable. And he said, please don't judge me. And I said, why would I judge you? There's no reason for me I don't judge anymore. And And he said, well, I went into the Army and they treated me like I was an imbecile. I was stupid, that I didn't know what was happening. They treated me, they thought because of my physical handicap, they thought I was stupid. And they beat me. I was very slow. I ended up carrying hauling artillery, carrying weapons for the soldiers. It's not what they told my parents. And they just treated me and they abused me. And then I was sent to, as a soldier, low rank, no stripes, into Auschwitz to tie up the prisoners in Auschwitz. I said, well, wait a second, I'm not understanding this. And then he continued on the story. He said, eventually he went AWOL. He couldn't take how he was being treated. And after a year and a half, one day, he said the rivers were full. And he was asked to take his jugs and to fill up the jugs with water and bring them back to the prisoners so they can have some water. He just decided at that point, he went to the river, he had a knife, he grabbed a little bit of food, and he ran and ran and ran. And he said, the soldiers wouldn't care if I never came back because they didn't like me, they mistreated me anyway. And so then, for 3 days, he ran in the forest. It was the third night. It was cold. It was hailing. The winds were howling. And he tripped over a rock and he fell and hit his head and he cracked his skull. He died that night of hypothermia and starvation. And he was angry. How dare they treat me like this? And I said, you went AWOL from the Polish army? He goes, I was never conscripted in the Polish army. I said, well, what army were you in? He goes, I was in the German army, the Wehrmacht. And I said, Lee, are you sure what you're hearing here? And he said, yeah. And I said, how does a Jew whose name is Ari Kaplan is conscripted into the German army as a soldier, a low-level soldier, a slave soldier, but that doesn't make sense. And so we ended the session, and I started to, of course, went online again and learned that on the German border of Poland, many German Jews had moved into Poland. Well, Ari's father, Joseph, married Henrietta, a non-Jew, and they raised their family in Rygrude. When the Polish sergeant came along, he told Joseph that he would be enlisted in the army, that he would be helping the Polish people, but he wasn't. He was fighting side by side with the Nazis. So they tricked many of the Poles. And so he was forced to do things against his own people, against the Jews and against the Polish people in the camps in Auschwitz. And he just couldn't take it anymore and he went AWOL. So when I went online to discover this, I found that there were 150,000 foot soldiers like Ari that were forced to join the German army. Many of them were Mischling, meaning mixed blood. It's a German word for mixed blood. So you might have had a parent or a grandparent that was part Jewish. And only during the first 2 years of the war had Hitler allowed 150,000 foot soldiers who were part Jews to be enlisted. And they came from only 2 provinces in Poland. Mm-hmm. One was Pomerania, which was where this Ari Kaplan Rygrude was. So now this is making sense. So then we had another session and he says, so I said, well, okay, you were a soldier in the German army. And he says, please forgive me. I meant no harm to harm our people. Please forgive me. And then he went on to talk about, I said, well, how did my father meet you? He goes, well, while I was laying dead in the forest, all alone, your father, my father, who was running in the forest for 3.5 years, early on, he came upon my body. He rolled me over And the spirit said, I noticed there was icicles forming on my beard, and your father kept rummaging through all my pockets and my clothes, and I tried to fight him off, and I was punching him and fighting him, but it wasn't, I couldn't. And then my father opened up my pocket and he found a pouch which had my Army ID. He found my knife, he took it, he took off my clothes and he put it on. And I realized that's when my father found the ID. And then Lea Kaplan, the spirit, said to me, I finally put 2 and 2 together and realized that I was dead, but my soul could not move on. I was so troubled and so angry at Hitler and the Germans that I couldn't see the light. And he said, when your father came upon me, he said my father's soul was fractured. He was traumatized. He wasn't even in his body. He said, the spirit said to me, like a flea that hops on the back of a horse, I decided to take my energy and merge my energy into your father's body. And he said it was easy because your father's whole energy system was fractured. And he said, please, please forgive me. And I said, I looked at you and I said, you're a Dybbuk? And he goes, call me what you want. But I didn't want to stay there in the forest watching the animals eat on my decay, and the vultures eat my decayed body. So I hopped into your father's body. And I was a Dybbuk in Yiddish. There's folklore about Jewish spirits going, invading another Jewish body. And he says, I was an entity attachment. I said, and I was freaked out. I said, my father had an entity. I said, well, how long did you stay in my father's body? He said, till the day he died. And I was freaked out. I said, he stayed? There's another energy, another personality inside my father. And he says, Karen, please, please forgive me. You know, those moments when your father, one moment was happy and the next moment he was angry. One moment he was one way and the next moment you didn't know when your father would become enraged and abusive. He goes, part of it was me and my personality and my energy that infused into your father. And
you saw him, you actually saw a picture of your parents' wedding picture, and you saw, when did you see that? Which was actually Lea Kaplan. Tell us about that. This is really interesting.
Okay. The stories now, the stories were unbelievable because I realized that he was inside my father's body all his life. Then he was like a fly on the wall in my house. So now I could ask him all these questions that I never had answers to about my father and the war and secrets and mysteries of my father's past. So he said to me during one of our 8 sessions, he said, Karen, you've seen me. I said, I've seen you. I'm not intuitive like that. I don't have those eyes to see aura. How could I even see you? He said, that picture of your parents' wedding photo. And all of a sudden I gasped. I said, oh, that's you. I thought it was the devil behind my father. So what happened was, in my book, there's a chapter that I wrote about my mother and my father and when they met. And there's a picture of my parents, their wedding photo. Mm-hmm. And it's always been hanging on my wall in my old house. I snapped a picture from my phone. I looked at the picture on my phone and I saw this man or shadow of a man behind my father. And I freaked out. I said, it looks like a devil. And I took the picture down and I put it away in a closet for months because I was too scared to put it back on the wall. Mm-hmm. So I took that picture and put it in my book because this is what my plans were. And it's hard to see here, but in the back, there's a silhouette of a man with a beard, looking down at my father, and he goes, Karen, it's not a devil. That's me behind your father. I mean, the craziest stories come out of our sessions, Lee.
Yes, it was very fascinating. Even I was fascinated.
One session after other, I'm flabbergasted. I'm shocked. And so I knew that, and the spirit knew that I was writing a book, and he was very nervous about what I was going to say about him and his family, being that he was a Nazi, or he worked alongside the Nazis. He wasn't a Nazi, he was in the German army. He was nervous about that, and of course I forgave him. He said he was like the children who were forced to join the Hitler Youth movement. They turned down their parents. It was that type of thing that they did with many of the people during the war in the German army. So
how are you putting this book together now? What kind of format are you writing? Because it took a lot of courage for you to write about your own personal story with your dad and forgiveness, and now you're moving into entity attachments. So
no, this is insane. I've never thought I'd write about an entity attachment. So it's really in the form of a memoir, and how I go about searching and during our sessions, and so it's so fascinating. I can't even put it down. I go from one chapter to the next, and it's just mind-boggling, this whole thing. But then the second part of the book, I had so many questions about Dybbuk's or entity attachments, and so in the second half of the book, we discuss all about entity attachment. How are some people more inclined to be invaded by an attachment? How do you know if someone has an entity attachment versus a personality disorder? So we had a lot of discussions about that as well, and I put all that in the second part of our memoir.
And this, I think, will be a fascinating movie. Just this book, I think, will be completely fascinating as a movie, because it will be part. I mean, it will be a true story, but in the sense that it'll also be like the movie of Ghost or something like that, where people are interested in the supernatural. So to me, this will be. I know you're going to make this book into a movie. I think I just know it. I can really feel it. I feel like it will be really, really, really successful. So. For those who don't always understand about entity attachments, not that I'm an expert about it, but I do know that, like Karen said, when someone is traumatized or they've been abused, their soul is in a fragile state. And so if people are not balanced, then actually other energies can attach to our energy. And so your dad was truly in a very traumatized state. And so that really makes sense for Ari Kaplan to be able to attach to him. And your dad was not even aware of it, not even aware. And so his personality was affected, and his behavior was affected. And so this is, I think, going to be a really fascinating, I'm going to say book, but movie when this comes out. You can see that you'll see, like, your dad, maybe, like, people might think he's bipolar or have mental illness, but there's a fine line between entity attachments and people's changing of their personalities.
Yeah, can you explain, like, how would somebody know that? Like, how would you know versus a personality disorder or an attachment, and what's the remedy? How, if you do know that you have an attachment, how? I mean, these exorcisms that happened in the church, and also I looked up in my own religion, and hundreds and hundreds of years ago in Europe, they did exorcisms in synagogues. So I found that fascinating.
Well, one of the ways that people can perhaps identify that maybe if they have an attachment is if they're behaving in an unusual way that's not their normal behavior. Maybe it just came on suddenly. Where if someone had mental illness, that usually begins to happen in, early onset of our adult years. If we have like schizophrenia or bipolar, and our behavior begins to shift. But if, let's say we're 50 years old or 40 years old or whatever, and all of a sudden we start behaving erratically, or as Spirit has told me, some of the individuals who have been responsible for some of the mass shootings that have happened, in our country, had entity attachments, where these negative energies are using our bodies to fuel their own anger and rage. And so again, if we're in a vulnerable state, then these attachments can come. So we just be aware of, if for some reason, if we're feeling depressed or feeling suicidal, or if we're acting erratically, perhaps we're drinking or doing drugs or doing something that we don't normally do, that we can go to a healer. There are people that specialize in this work in terms of clearing entity attachments from other people. Not, like you said, the priests or the rabbis, but also there are people in the metaphysical community that understand this and can assist you. So it's not to frighten you, but this is very real, especially for those who are open, especially people who perhaps maybe have mental illness or use drugs or alcohol, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. I have a friend who had an entity attachment that didn't know she had it for years, but her family knew she was behaving erratically. And so she finally was directed to a minister here in Florida, and the lady works with clearing entity attachments, and then she was healed from that. So this is very real. But for your dad, he was not aware, and probably even if someone told him this, he probably wouldn't have believed it anyway.
Right, he would have believed it. But the Spirit told me that he would try. He was like my dad's conscience, and he would try to tell my dad to stop beating my mother, or to stop sleeping around, and to stop. And every time the Spirit tried to leave the body, my father would go crazy and get enraged and just become abusive. And so after a while, he started to try to talk to my father, and my father heard voices in his head, but he didn't understand that was coming from the energy attachment.
Yeah, because he wasn't really there to harm your dad. He was just actually there. He was frightened.
Right.
Yeah. So that makes it even more fascinating that he wasn't there to provide any negativity or evil energy to your dad. It was he's about 19. Is that how old he was? I can't remember how old he was.
He was a couple of years younger than my father. And so they were just a few years apart.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to ask you, I know that we've worked together for many years, and you are a researcher, and you are skeptical, and yet how did all this play out for you? I know that it was difficult for you, and it probably was. You probably thought I was, totally a nut, but you persisted on. What pursued you to continue to pursue this? Just because you wanted to understand your dad better, or I know you're driven, but it was like you've always been one who you use that balance of healthy skepticism with, diving in and trying to figure out, what is happening. So, I really respect you for that.
Well, I try to look at the scientific way, or I tried first to do the conventional type of research. But when I came to a dead end with that, and there was, I wouldn't know what country to start with in Europe, Poland, Germany, where, Hungary. And I tried my best for like 6 months going at this. And I thought I'd ask you, hoping that you'd give me another institution, but no, you just gave me the shortcut. That's all.
Yeah, that's what my work does. It just gets right to the root of it.
My Hebrew name is Lea. I was named after two of my father's older sisters that were murdered in the Holocaust. And for many Jews, naming European Jews, naming your child after someone that died, or in this case, perished in the Holocaust, you want to pay respect to them. So I was confused. My two brothers and I were named after all the relatives of my father's family, where our Hebrew names were, and I didn't understand why we didn't carry on Steinsapier. And I thought, and I really wanted to understand that. I wanted to understand, what was this about this man that was it just pure paranoia, which my father carried his whole life? Or was there a reason, a secret behind it, of which Ari Kaplan, the spirit, was able to share everything about my father, everything that I asked about. And it's just amazing. He opened my eyes up to my father's mind and his whole way of thinking, and all these questions that I had about my childhood, he gave me the answers to, and they all made sense.
It probably really helps you to continue on with the healing process with your dad, in the continuing healing and forgiveness. So because you had the higher or the bigger perspective of what's going on with your dad. It just wasn't, he was, hateful and mean, but there was this entity attachment that was affecting his
anger from his death and from his life in the army brought that energy, and it fused with my father. So kind of doubled the negativity, the negative energy in my father's body, doubled the anger and the fear. And my father took also on his personality of that part of his energy. So just never knew. When I went with a couple of girlfriends into Madison, I have a girlfriend that is a rabbi, and she asked one of us to come up during the Saturday service to say a prayer over the Torah. I went up there, and normally you say your name, daughter of, and I normally would say, I'm Karen Kaplan, daughter of Ari Kaplan and Harriet Kaplan. But this time I'd said, I am daughter of Avram Yankel Steinsapier. And I said that because I wanted my father in spirit to know that I wanted to bless him and help him remember who he was before June 22nd, 1941, when he witnessed that home invasion and his family butchered and his life was altered from that day. I blessed him. I wanted him to be that young boy who was more innocent and had hopes and dreams of living a life in Poland versus being a refugee. And so it was helpful for me to know that I blessed my father with his birth name, because that's who, it really was,
important for him to be acknowledged, for who he truly was, for his authentic self, his true self, his namesake. Well, what are your I know you're working on this, and is there a time frame that you're finishing up with this, when this book might be coming out?
No, but I have all the chapters written out. I need them to get edited, and I need them to have someone just edit the whole book. And then, it may take a while. My other book took me 4 years from the time I started. I started this in March during COVID. And so I've been working at it each day.
And what would you like for the audience? What would you like to put out to the audience today? I know that you are hoping to find producers and investors in your book, or the script for Descended Reichos. So what do you wish to leave with the audience today for those who are listening? And do you have a final message for them?
Well, that well, for me personally, I'd like to find somebody to help me with this, but that we all have stories, and we all have histories, and we all have our unique backgrounds. And if there's something that they might want to share and put down on paper to leave for their families, this is a perfect opportunity if they have some extra time during this whether it's about their family, their background, or about any thoughts that they write them down, and they can create so many beautiful stories that they can hand down to their children and families and so on.
And how is your family taken to this, or your friends to this piece? Because now, you're leaped into the unknown here.
Yeah. So some of my family members who don't, there's one thing about believing in the spirits and the spiritual world. I mean, there are different levels of this, and some of my friends believe that there are spirits and that they can connect with us. Some of them don't, but then there's more things out there that I've learned through you, like, aliens and, galactic brothers and sisters, and so I'm open to learning about really anything. But for those who are skeptical, then I would say consider this book as a sci-fi paranormal book in that kind of category, and read it from that perspective, because I was skeptical too, highly skeptical. So you can look at it as a paranormal type sci-fi book, and you don't have to believe in any of this, but it's a really good story. So
yes, and you definitely are a hard sell, so you made me work hard.
Yes, I don't take anything at face value. Proof. And when I get enough of the proof from the spirit world, then I have to sit back and say, okay, this cannot be coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. This makes sense. So, yeah.
Well, it was a fascinating process. You have such a good memory. I don't remember, I just remember bits and pieces of it, but you have such a fabulous memory of what was brought forth or what was channeled. I just remember that it was fascinating, that I had empathy for both your father and for Ari Kaplan for the story, because it's, as we know, it's somewhat unusual, but it's truth.
Yes. And then I thought about all these young men that we're sending over to fight in all these wars, and what they witnessed, just like this young man, Ari Kaplan, or my father, what they've witnessed and what it does just to their psyche, to their bodies. I mean, they can come back with being handicapped with hands or fingers or arms, but on an energy level, their energy inside of them is fragmented and scattered, that they come back so broken that it not only affects them, but it affects everyone around them. It affects the next generation. And so it's very difficult when someone goes off to war. I mean, what happens, and on an energy level as well, not just a physical or a mental, but an energetic level. Yeah.
And why it's really important for us to begin to heal the wounds of our past, so that we just don't continue to carry this within our own DNA and pass it down to our own family. I know that your children don't bear the same scars that you have. I mean, you've been a great mother, but that's a whole different lineage, but it's still within the genetic lineage, the epigenetics of us, that perhaps we're just got a couple of minutes of that, but do you want to speak to that?
We have a parent or a grandparent who has gone through major trauma, famine, suffering. And we are affected. My friends and I, who are children of Holocaust survivors, our DNA, our biological makeup is affected. We're very different than other of our other friends whose parents have not gone through major trauma. Our DNA has changed. It doesn't take thousands of years to change your DNA. It's from one generation to the next. So that some of us may have higher, cortisol levels, and I also have, in some ways, I don't know if it's PTSD, but I have startle reflex When I hear loud noises or quick movements, I startle and scream so easily. Is that from being brought up in my home? It's also part of the epigenetics, and so it's really important that I learn to heal my psyche with forgiveness, because then, you know, your body is connected to your mental body and to your energy body, and once you help heal one part of that, it helps soothe the other parts of your body. So for me, the healing came when I was able to calm my nerves in my body, learn to forgive and let go of the anger.
And that's really important. And so this is really the message, truly the message of both Karen's book. Not only is it entertaining, but it's really about forgiveness and being at peace and helping ourselves to stay balanced and centered. So Karen, I know our time has ended here today, but I know I'll have you back on again. I'm so grateful for you and having an open mind and being able to trust my work with spirit, and it's been fascinating. So go ahead and give those out there your information about how they can acquire your book and your website, and if they have any questions to contact you.
Well, if you have any questions, you always can contact me on my website. It's posted up there. You can get my book on Amazon. It's called Descendants of Rygrid, Learning to Forgive. I'm doing also book talks on Zoom. So if you're part of a book club and you want me to come and speak, I'm more than happy to do that. And thank you for having me today.
You're welcome. It's always fun. I love having you on my show, and I love working with you, and I love these projects that we've done together over the years. I don't remember when this all started, but it's been a while. It's probably been at least 10 years. It's been a while. Yeah, it's definitely, we're the unlikely pair, but somehow we work together, right? We work well together. So thank you, my dear friend. God bless you. And I'm so excited for you and the excitement of the LA Film Festival and the award and all the excitement. I know you're just going to continue on because you have that, not only do you have that little lucky streak, I think, but I feel like it's your destiny to bring this forward. So it'll all work out. So
thank you.
Thank you, my dear. So happy for you. So
thank you.
All right. We'll talk again. Have a blessed day.
Bye.
Bye-bye, honey. Bye-bye. That was Karen Kaplan. She is always fascinating, and she is such a delight. I'm honored to be her friend and to help share what I can to bring her story forth. We've come in co-collaboration together. So I know that she and I have been together in other lifetimes, and we feel like we're spiritual sisters. So we're co-collaborating together. So it's an unusual partnership, but I think it's been destined. And so just stay tuned. Karen's going to do lots of good work. Speaking about peace, tomorrow is my monthly 12 Mastery Teachings class, and I am now on into November, and it is the 11th month, and the 11th chapter is peace. So I will be bringing the message from Christ tomorrow about the lesson of peace from my book, The 12 Mastery Teachings of Christ. And again, you can always find my work at leachapin.com. If you'd like to see or receive a reading, you can certainly contact me at leachapin@gmail.com. Because I do individual and personal readings, I also teach classes and have done the master classes here through Goldylocks Productions, and continue on with intuitive development classes both privately, and will continue on with Goldylocks Productions. Also, my book, Divine Union, The Love Story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, is both available on my website, both in audiobook as well is in print form and in Kindle, as well as the 12 Master Teachings are also in audiobook. So if you prefer to listen to my books in audio, take a look at my website, again, leachapin.com. Next week, we will have another fascinating guest to be announced, but we will continue on every Monday to be able to share just inspiring stories. That's why I like to call my show Inspiration from Spirit, because we never really know what Spirit is bringing us and how we can stay open to the unseen world. I've been channeling now for 27 years working with the Ascended Masters, the Galactic Realm, the Angelic Realm, bringing messages from Spirit. And so this is another format for me to share with you and to help you to open your mind and expand your mind. Just like when I met Karen, and we were from two different worlds, and you can see how far she's advanced and what she's doing. So you never know what Spirit has for you and what your higher self and your soul has in mind for you as well. So stay open, go in peace, and remember to be the change you wish to see. Have a blessed day, and until we speak again, have a blessed and lovely and loving day. Go in peace. Thank you.
Become a Goldylocks Productions VIP patron. Receive exclusive access to live stream special and other epic perks. Join the Goldylocks Productions VIP community today.